Supreme Admiral Vectori stood on the command deck of the Celestial Dawn, his iridescent scales reflecting the soft blue glow of the tactical displays surrounding him. The Zarkak's flagship, like all vessels of their mighty confederation, represented the pinnacle of aesthetic and technological achievement, all smooth curves and crystalline surfaces that seemed to flow like liquid starlight. Supreme Admiral, Sub-Commander Relvax called out, her antenna twitching with mild agitation. Long-range scanners have detected an anomalous vessel in Sector 7. Vectori glided across the polished deck, his ceremonial robes trailing behind him. "Show me," he commanded, his secondary eyes narrowing as the main display crystallized into focus. The image that materialized before him was, to his refined sensibilities, almost offensive. The vessel was massive, yes, but it bore none of the elegant design principles that marked a civilized species' approach to space travel. Instead of the expected crystalline architecture, this ship bristled with what appeared to be crude armor plating. Rather than the subtle defense projectors used by all known spacefaring races, this vessel bore obvious weapon emplacements that stuck out from its hull like thorns on some primitive plant. Classification, Vectori demanded, all four arms clasped behind his back. "Unknown, Supreme Admiral," Relvax replied, her claws dancing across the sensor interface. "But the energy signatures suggest it's powered by nuclear fusion." She almost stumbled over the words, as if admitting such a primitive power source existed in a starship caused her physical discomfort. A ripple of amusement passed through the bridge crew. Nuclear fusion. Next, they'd discover it used chemical propellants for maneuvering. The very thought was laughable. "Magnification," Vectori ordered, his mandibles clicking in anticipated satisfaction. The image zoomed in, revealing markings on the vessel's hull. Their linguistic computers quickly translated the crude symbols. HMS T NDERSA. Life signs. Vectori asked, already composing in his mind the condescending first contact message he would send to these obvious primitives. Organic, Relvax confirmed. Carbon-based, bilateral symmetry. Internal skeleton. She paused, double-checking her readings. "But our scans are having trouble penetrating their hull plating. There's some kind of interference." That gave Vectori pause. Zarkak's sensors were the most sophisticated in known space. Nothing should be able to block them, especially not a vessel using such primitive technology. Still, he had encountered hundreds of new species in his 3 centuries of service. All had eventually submitted to Zarkak's authority, as was proper. "Open a communication channel," he commanded. "Let's educate these primitives on proper protocol in civilized space." The communication officer complied, but the response was not what any of them expected. Instead of immediate deference, there was only silence. The vessel continued its steady course, seemingly ignorant of the honor being bestowed upon it by Zarkak's attention. "They dare ignore us." Vectori's scales flushed a deep purple with indignation. "Send the standard compliance burst. Remind them of their place in the cosmic order." A pulse of quantum-encrypted data shot across space, containing both the might of Zarkak's military history and the benefits of submission to their authority. It was a message that had cowed countless species. The response came not in words but in action. The primitive vessel's weapon emplacements swiveled ever so slightly, taking precise aim at the Celestial Dawn's most vulnerable points. Points that should have been impossible for their crude sensors to identify. "Supreme Admiral," Relvax's voice carried an unfamiliar edge. Was it concern? "They've activated their targeting systems. And they're broadcasting something." "Play it," Vectori commanded, his inner eyelids blinking rapidly. A human voice filled the bridge, speaking in perfect Zarkak's. "This is Captain Amanda Miller of the United Earth vessel Thunderchild. You are currently in violation of United Earth space. Please state your intentions immediately." The voice carried neither fear nor awe, just a professional calm that somehow made Vectori's scales itch. For the first time in his long career, He felt something unfamiliar stir in his thorax, an emotion he would later recognize as doubt. Captain Amanda Miller sat in her command chair aboard the Thunderchild, maintaining perfect posture despite being 12 hours into her shift. The bridge hummed with quiet efficiency around her, each crew member focused intently on their stations. Her years in naval intelligence had taught her that first contact scenarios were won or lost in these initial moments of interaction. "AEG's analysis update," she asked, her voice carrying clearly across the bridge without needing to raise it. The ship's AI responded in its characteristic measured tones. Their vessel architecture suggests a Type II civilization with emphasis on quantum engineering. However, Captain, they appear to have several critical blind spots in their defensive systems. Lieutenant Jackson at Tactical couldn't suppress a small grin. "Ma'am, they're practically broadcasting their shield harmonics. It's like they've never heard of electronic warfare." "Let's not get cocky, Lieutenant," Miller replied, though she shared his assessment. "Commander Rodriguez, status of our combat systems." Her XO looked up from his console, dark eyes gleaming with professional satisfaction. "All weapons hot but powered down, Captain. Point Defense Grid is tracking their vessel with passive sensors only. Engineering reports our reactor is purring like a kitten. They've masked our power signature to look like basic fusion instead of our actual output." Miller nodded, mentally reviewing the first contact protocols she'd helped write during her intelligence days. The Thunderchild had been purpose-built for encounters like this, though the aliens' arrogance was proving to be an unexpected advantage. "Ma'am," Communications Officer Parker called out. "They're broadcasting again. Same compliance burst as before, but they've added what AEGIS identifies as military historical data. They're trying to intimidate us with their battle records." Miller allowed herself a small smile. "Send them our standard acknowledgement packet. Minimal information, just enough to confirm we understand their language." She paused, considering. "And Parker, make sure it's transmitted in perfect Zarkax. Let's see how they handle that." The bridge crew worked with practiced precision, each action carefully calculated to maintain their facade of technological inferiority while gathering crucial intelligence about their potential adversaries. "AEGs," Miller spoke again. "What's your assessment of their likely response patterns? Based on their behavior and transmitted historical data, the Zarkax exhibit a 94% probability of escalating to shows of force when faced with what they perceive as inferior species, refusing to submit. Their tactical doctrine appears rigid, favoring standardized responses over adaptive warfare." Miller's fingers drummed once on her armrest, her only tell when deep in thought. The Thunderchild's outer hull had been deliberately designed to look primitive, with visible weapon emplacements that any advanced race would consider laughably obvious. But beneath that deceptive exterior lay the most advanced warship humanity had ever constructed. "They're powering up their neural disruptors," Rodriguez reported, fighting to keep the amusement out of his voice. "Looks like they're sticking to the playbook." "Time to show them something new," Miller responded. "Engineering, disengage reactor masking on my mark. Tactical, get me a firing solution on their primary shield emitters, but hold for my command. Communications, prepare to broadcast on all frequencies." The tension on the bridge ratcheted up several notches as her crew responded with crisp acknowledgments. Miller had studied countless first contact scenarios during her intelligence career, but this one felt different. The Zarkax's overwhelming confidence would be their undoing. "Captain," AEGS interrupted her thoughts, "I'm detecting power spikes consistent with weapon charging across their vessel. Their targeting systems are actively scanning us." Miller straightened in her chair. This was the moment that would define humanity's first military encounter with an alien species. Everything in her career had prepared her for this instant. "Let them make the first move," she commanded. But when they do, she let the sentence hang unfinished, knowing her crew understood perfectly. They had trained for this, prepared for this, and now they would show these aliens exactly what humanity was capable of. The Thunderchild waited in space, a wolf in sheep's clothing, ready to teach the galaxy's self-proclaimed masters their first lesson in human warfare. Supreme Admiral Vectori's scales had shifted to a deep crimson, a sign of barely contained rage that made his subordinates edge away from him. 3 hours of diplomatic circling had produced nothing but polite deflections from the human vessel, each response more infuriating than the last. "Enough," he snarled, all 4 hands clenching into fists. "Prepare the neural disruptors. Full power. Let's see how diplomatic they remain when their nervous systems shut down." On the bridge of the Thunderchild, Aegis registered the power spike immediately. "Captain, they're charging what appears to be a biological warfare system. Neural disruptors, designed to incapacitate organic crew members." Miller nodded, having expected this. "Initiate Protocol 7. All hands, this is not a drill. Switching to internal communications only." She pressed a button on her chair, broadcasting shipwide. "All stations, prepare for neural attack. Isolation shields up." The Zarkak's weapon discharge, a rippling wave of quantum-shifted particles designed to interfere with neural pathways. It had subdued countless species, turning proud warrior races into helpless masses of twitching flesh. Vectori watched with anticipation, waiting for the familiar sight of a ship going dark as its crew collapsed. Instead, the Thunderchild's running lights brightened, and its weapon systems hummed to life. "Impossible," Relvax exclaimed, her antennae quivering. "They should be unconscious." Miller's voice came through their comms, clear and amused. "Interesting approach. Did you really think we wouldn't have countermeasures for neural attacks? Humanity's been experimenting with brain-machine interfaces for over a century." The bridge crew of the Thunderchild watched through their internal cameras as the alien weapon washed harmlessly over their hull. The isolation shields, developed after decades of research into neural protection, functioned perfectly. "Aegis," Miller commanded, "show them what we think of unauthorized neural tampering." "Cyber Package Delta." "Executing, Captain," the AI responded, targeting their neural weapon emitters with a reverse-engineered pulse. The Zarkak's crew watched in horror as their own neural disruptors began to spark and overheat. Emergency warnings blared across their pristine bridge as systems started failing in cascade. "How?" Vectori demanded, his scales now paling to a sickly yellow. "How are they doing this?" "Supreme Admiral," Relvax reported, her voice shaking. "They've penetrated our quantum shields. They're using our own neural frequency against us. The weapon is turning inward." Miller stood from her command chair, straightening her uniform. "Lieutenant Parker, open a channel." She waited for the confirmation nod. "Supreme Admiral Vectori, I trust we're done with the neural attack phase of our interaction. I should warn you that every aggressive scan you've performed has given us more data about your systems. Would you like to see what else we've learned?" The Thunderchild's weapon systems rotated in perfect synchronization, each taking aim at a critical point on the Celestial Dawn's hull. Points that should have been hidden by their advanced stealth systems. "They've mapped our entire defense grid," a Zarkak's technician whispered in disbelief. "Every weakness, every blind spot." "Supreme Admiral," Miller continued, her voice carrying the weight of humanity's military history. "I'll be direct. You're trespassing in United Earth space. Your neural attack constitutes an act of war under our laws. However, we're willing to overlook this transgression, this time, in the interest of peaceful relations." Vectori felt the command slipping from his grasp. Everything about this encounter had gone wrong. The primitive vessel wasn't primitive at all, and its crew had turned his own weapons against him with embarrassing ease. "Captain Miller," he responded, trying to maintain some dignity, "perhaps we could discuss this situation further." "Of course," Miller replied, and now there was a predatory edge to her friendly tone. "But first, power down your remaining weapons, all of them, including the particle beam emitter you're currently charging behind your third shield matrix." The Supreme Admiral's jaw dropped. They even knew about that. The first shot came from the Zarkak support vessel Eternal Light, its commander acting without orders. The energy beam lanced out across space, aimed at the Thunderchild's apparent weak point, a section of hull that their scan suggested was more lightly armored. Incoming fire, Lieutenant Jackson announced calmly. Point Defense Grid has a solution. Miller didn't even need to give the order. The Thunderchild's defensive systems engaged automatically, a web of intercepting lasers tracking and meeting the energy beam. The alien weapon scattered harmlessly against a previously invisible barrier of ionized particles. AEGs, Miller commanded. Execute Battle Plan Theta. Show them what a real warship can do. Acknowledged, Captain. All systems executing coordinated response. What followed would be studied in military academies, both human and alien, for centuries to come. The Thunderchild's outer hull shifted, armor plates sliding and reconfiguring to reveal weapon systems that had been completely hidden from Zarkak scans. By the eternal stars, Vectori whispered, watching as the supposedly primitive vessel transformed before his eyes. What is this? The answer came in the form of a synchronized assault that defied conventional space combat doctrine. Rail guns accelerated projectiles to relativistic speeds, leaving spatial distortions in their wake. Electronic warfare suites penetrated supposedly impenetrable quantum shields, turning the Zarkax's own targeting systems against them. Multiple hits on enemy vessels, Jackson reported with professional satisfaction. Their shield harmonics are failing exactly as predicted. Commander Rodriguez monitored the tactical display with growing appreciation. They're trying to adapt, Captain. Switching to their secondary defense protocols. Miller nodded, having expected this. AEGs, implement countermeasure suite beta. Let's show them why predictable protocols are a weakness, not a strength. The AI's response was instantaneous. As the Zarkax ships shifted their shield frequencies, the Thunderchild's weapons adjusted faster than any organic crew could react. Each shot found its mark with surgical precision. Impossible, Relvax shouted on the Celestial Dawn's bridge. They're anticipating our pattern shifts before we execute them. Vectori watched in growing horror as his support ship's shields failed one by one. The human vessel wasn't just fighting. It was conducting warfare like a deadly symphony, each action perfectly timed and coordinated. Sir, his tactical officer reported, voice quavering. They're not targeting our critical systems. They're disabling our weapons. Methodically, it's like they're taking us apart piece by piece. On the Thunderchild's bridge, Miller watched the battle unfold with calculated intensity. Status of the enemy fleet. 8 vessels effectively disarmed, Rodriguez reported. No casualties on their side. Our targeting computers are making sure we only hit weapons and shields. Though, he paused, checking his readings, I think we may have dented their pride a bit. A ghost of a smile crossed Miller's face. AEGs, begin Phase 2. Let's demonstrate our point defense capabilities. The AI complied, and the space around the Thunderchild lit up with a dazzling display of defensive power. Incoming fire was intercepted with perfect precision, while electronic countermeasures caused several Zarkax missiles to loop back and hover harmlessly between the fleets. Message from the enemy flagship, Parker announced. They're asking if we're using an eye. Tell them that AEGIS is merely one component of our defense systems, Miller replied. And remind them that we still haven't brought our main guns online. The threat wasn't idle. The Thunderchild's primary weapon batteries remained silent, their true capabilities still hidden. The message was clear. Everything the Zarkax had seen was just the warm-up act. Vectori stared at the tactical display, his prestigious military career flashing before his eyes. The human vessel had systematically dismantled his fleet's offensive capabilities without inflicting a single casualty. This wasn't just combat. This was a demonstration of overwhelming technological superiority disguised as mercy. Supreme Admiral, his tactical officer reported quietly, we're detecting power buildups in sections of their ship we didn't even know existed. The worst part, Vectori realized, was that the humans were clearly enjoying themselves. This wasn't just a battle. This was a teaching moment, and his fleet had become an unwilling classroom. Space rippled as 30 Zarkax warships emerged from quantum transit, their crystalline hulls catching starlight like faceted jewels. The reinforcement fleet, commanded by High Marshal Ixal, represented the finest ships in 3 sectors of Zarkax space. Status of the human vessel. Ixal demanded, his ceremonial armor gleaming as he strode onto his command deck. Still engaged with Supreme Admiral Vectori's squadron, High Marshal, his sensor officer reported. They've disabled most of our fleet's primary weapons without destroying a single ship. Aboard the Thunderchild, HFY was the first to detect the new arrivals. Captain, 30 Zarkax capital ships have entered the system. Energy signatures suggest improved weapon systems compared to our current opponents. Miller's expression didn't change, but her eyes gleamed with interest. Tactical analysis. Their formation indicates standard Zarkax assault doctrine, Rodriguez reported, studying his displays. They're positioning for a stellar cross maneuver, a simultaneous attack from multiple vectors. Let them come, Miller ordered, standing from her command chair. All hands, prepare for heavy combat. Damage control teams to ready stations. AGIS, initiate combat protocol Omega. High Marshal Ixal watched the human vessel with growing anticipation. Begin the attack. All ships, concentrate fire on their primary hull sections. Let's see how primitive armor holds up against real firepower. The space around the Thunderchild erupted with energy as 30 ships opened fire simultaneously. Beams of coherent light and streams of quantum-tipped missiles converged on the human vessel from every direction. Multiple impacts imminent, Jackson announced, his fingers dancing across his tactical console. Point defense engaging, but there's too much incoming fire to stop it all. Miller nodded calmly. As expected, brace for impact. Show them how humanity handles a punch. The first hits struck the Thunderchild's outer hull, burning through the initial armor layer. Zarkax crews watched in anticipation, expecting the vessel to shatter under their combined assault. Instead, something extraordinary happened. Adaptive armor responding, engineering reported over the comm. Regenerative matrices online. Damage control teams moving to affected sectors. The Thunderchild's hull began to shift and flow, damaged sections realigning as emergency systems engage. Automated repair drones swarmed out from concealed bays, patching breaches almost as quickly as they formed. Impossible, Ixal exclaimed, watching his fleet's combined firepower fail to cripple the human ship. Nothing could survive that concentration of fire. Sir, his tactical officer interrupted, the human vessel. It's still firing. Accuracy unchanged despite damage. How are they maintaining combat effectiveness? On the Thunderchild's bridge, Miller allowed herself a small smile. Status report. Hull integrity at 82% and stabilizing. Rodriguez announced. All weapon systems remain operational. Damage control teams report successful containment of all breaches. Engineering says the reactor's purring like a happy cat. Their faces must be priceless, Jackson commented, not looking up from his station as he coordinated another precise volley of return fire. They hit us with everything they had. And we're still here. Miller opened a channel to all Zarkax ships. This has been an impressive demonstration, High Marshal. However, you should know that the Thunderchild was specifically designed to absorb far worse punishment than this. Shall we show you why human ships don't need to look pretty to be effective? The Thunderchild's response came not in words but in action. Its damaged hull sections, rather than hampering its combat effectiveness, seemed to have only made it more dangerous. Like a wounded predator, it fought with increased ferocity, each strike more precise than the last. High Marshal, Vectori's voice came through on a private channel. I've seen enough. These humans, they don't build ships to prevent damage. They build them to endure it, to become stronger from it. We're not fighting a vessel. We're fighting the distilled essence of every war humanity has ever fought. Ixal watched as another wave of precision fire from the Thunderchild disabled 3 more of his ship's weapon systems. The human vessel, its hull scared but its spirit unbroken, moved through space with deadly grace, proving that true strength came not from avoiding damage, but from transcending it. Fear. It was an emotion the Zarkax had almost forgotten existed. As a species that had dominated their sector of space for millennia, they had grown accustomed to being the ones who inspired fear, not experienced it. 4th Squadron reporting complete weapons failure. A communications officer announced, her voice trembling. Their crew is requesting permission to withdraw. High Marshal Ixal's scales had lost all color, fading to an ashen gray. Denied. No retreats. We are the Zarkax Confederation. We do not flee from primitives. As if in response to his declaration, the Thunderchild's next broadcast cut through their command channels. It wasn't a transmission of threats or demands, but rather the sound of human laughter. The bridge crew of a recently disabled Zarkax vessel was listening in horror to the casual conversation of their attackers. Damage Control Team 6, good work on that hull breach. Take 5 and grab some coffee before the next round. Engineering to bridge. That last hit actually helped realign the port armor matrix. Thanks for the assist, aliens. Medical reports 0 casualties, Captain. Though Lieutenant Chen says she sprained her wrist from too much precise targeting practice. The psychological impact was devastating. The humans weren't just winning. They were treating one of the most severe battles in recent Zarkax history like a training exercise. High Marshal. Vectori's voice cut through the chaos. They're tagging our escape pods with tracking beacons, but leaving them untouched. They're showing us they could destroy our retreating crews at any time, but choose not to. On the Thunderchild's bridge, Miller watched the tactical display with satisfaction. AGG is status of enemy fleet. 17 vessels have lost primary weapons capability, the AI reported. Their formation is beginning to fragment as individual commanders break protocol to avoid our targeting solutions. Interesting note. Their crypto communications are showing signs of increasing emotional distress. Rodriguez couldn't help but grin. They're not used to fighting something that gets stronger the more they hit it. Every time they land a solid hit, our adaptive systems learn and improve. We're literally using their own attacks to upgrade our defenses in real time. Speaking of upgrades, Miller turned to her tactical officer, Lieutenant Jackson. How's that new firing solution coming along? Jackson's fingers danced across his console. Ready to implement, Captain. Their shield harmonics are desperately trying to adapt to our last attack pattern. They haven't realized we're letting them see only what we want them to see. Miller nodded. Execute at will. Let's show them another trick. The Thunderchild's next attack pattern was completely different from its previous ones, cutting through the supposedly adapted Zarkax shields like they weren't even there. 3 more ships lost weapons capability in the span of 20 seconds. Impossible. Ixal slammed all 4 fists onto his command console. How are they breaking through? We adjusted our shields. High Marshal, his science officer whispered, I don't think they were ever using their full capabilities. They've been playing with us, testing responses, learning. The realization hit the Zarkax command staff like a physical blow. Every adaptation they'd made, every tactical adjustment, had just given the humans more data about their capabilities. The battle hadn't been about victory or defeat. It had been about education. New transmission from the human vessel, the communications officer announced, her antennae drooping in resignation. Put it through, Ixal ordered, knowing he wouldn't like what he heard. Attention Zarkax fleet. Miller's voice carried an almost gentle tone. We've now cataloged and analyzed every variation of your shield systems and weapon configurations. Your tactical database has been quite educational. Would you like to see what we can do with this knowledge when we stop holding back? The Thunderchild's scarred hull began to glow, previously hidden weapon ports cycling to full power. The energy readings made the Zarkak sensor operators step back from their consoles in shock. By the eternal void, Vectori breathed. They've been fighting at reduced power this entire time. This wasn't a battle. It was an intelligence-gathering operation. In the endless night of space, the Thunderchild hung among the stars like a battle-scarred predator, its wounds only serving to make it look more fearsome. The message was clear. The real fight hadn't even started yet. Sub-Commander Keltax stood motionless in the analysis center of the Zarkak's flagship, her normally iridescent scales dulled with exhaustion. Holographic displays surrounded her, showing every angle of the ongoing battle. Though battle wasn't really the right word anymore, what had started as a simple first contact scenario had evolved into the most comprehensive defeat in Zarkak's military history. Sub-Commander, her assistant whispered, High Marshal Ixel demands another tactical analysis. Keltax barely heard him. Her attention was fixed on a simulation running before her, showing the Thunderchild's damage response patterns. Something about it tickled at the edges of her consciousness, a revelation trying to break through. Look at this, she murmured, manipulating the holographic display. Every time we land a solid hit, their systems don't just repair the damage, they improve. It's like they expect to be hit. On the Thunderchild's bridge, Miller was reviewing similar data, AGG's, analysis of enemy fleet movements. They're attempting to formulate a new attack strategy, Captain, the AI responded. However, their tactical doctrine appears to be breaking down under stress. Individual commanders are beginning to act independently rather than following standard protocols. Rodriguez nodded from his station. That's what happens when you build your entire military around the assumption of perfection. The first time it fails, the whole system starts to crack. That was it. Keltax's antennae shot up as the realization hit her. By the void, that's the difference. She rushed to the main tactical display, her claws flying over the controls. Maximum magnification on the human vessel's hull structure. The image resolved, showing the Thunderchild's battle-scared but still fully functional exterior. Where Zarkak's ships were designed with seamless, perfect crystalline hulls, the human vessel was built in layers, with redundant systems and overlapping armor plates. High Marshal, she called out, her voice carrying across the command deck. I understand now. We've been looking at this all wrong. She transferred her analysis to the main screen. Look at their design philosophy. We build our ships to be perfect, to prevent any damage. They build theirs to survive being imperfect. The command deck fell silent as the implications sank in. 3 millennia of Zarkak's military doctrine was based on the premise of achieving perfect defense through superior technology. Their ships were marvels of engineering, designed to prevent any damage from reaching critical systems. But that's primitive, one of the senior officers protested. No, Keltax countered, her voice growing stronger. It's evolutionary. Look at their history. Every time humans faced defeat, they adapted. They don't try to create perfect defenses. They create systems that grow stronger from damage. On the Thunderchild, Lieutenant Jackson was tracking the increased communications activity from the flagship. Captain, there's a lot of chatter coming from their command deck. I think someone over there finally figured it out. Miller smiled. Good. Maybe now we can have a real conversation. She turned to her XO. Status of our combat improvements. The data from their attacks has been invaluable, Rodriguez reported. Engineering says our shield harmonics are now 40% more efficient thanks to their targeting data. Even our hull composition has been optimized based on their weapon frequencies. Keltax continued her analysis, her excitement building. Every system on their ship is designed to learn from failure. Their armor doesn't just repair damage. It adapts to resist it better next time. Their targeting computers don't just track our movements. They learn our patterns and predict our responses. And their crew, she added, displaying footage from intercepted communications, they're not demoralized by damage to their ship. They treat it as normal. Expected. Part of the process. High Marshal Ixel, his proud bearing somewhat diminished, approached the tactical display. "You're saying they built their entire military doctrine around the assumption that they would be hit, that they would fail?" "No, High Marshal," Keltax corrected respectfully. "They built it around the certainty that they would survive being hit, learn from it, and come back stronger." She gestured at the Thunderchild, its scared hull a testament to its resilience. "We designed our ships never to break. They designed theirs to be unbreakable." High Marshal Ixal stood before the combined tactical display, watching as centuries of Zarkak's military superiority crumbled around him. The Thunderchild had systematically disabled 25 of his 30 ships, without a single casualty on either side. Each strike had been precisely calculated, each system failure carefully engineered. "High Marshal," Vectori spoke up, his voice carrying the weight of hard-won wisdom, "I believe it's time we acknowledge the reality of our situation." Before Ixal could respond, a new transmission cut through their command channels. "Zarkak's command." Captain Miller's voice was calm but carried an edge of finality. "I believe we've concluded today's demonstration. My tactical officer has prepared a comprehensive analysis of your fleet's performance. Would you like to review it?" The silence on the Zarkak's command deck was deafening. The human vessel was offering them tactical advice. After thoroughly defeating their finest fleet. "Receiving data packet now," Sub-Commander Keltax announced, her antennae twitching with barely contained excitement as she reviewed the information. This is incredible. They've provided a detailed breakdown of every tactical mistake we made, complete with suggested improvements and alternative strategies." On the Thunderchild's bridge, Miller stood at ease, watching the Zarkak's flagship through the main viewport. "AEGS, prepare to transmit the second data package." "Package ready, Captain," the AI confirmed, including full analysis of their shield harmonics vulnerabilities, subspace communication weaknesses, and suggested defensive improvements. Rodriguez raised an eyebrow. "We're giving them our tactical analysis. That's either very generous or very confident." Miller smiled. "Why not both? Lieutenant Parker, open a channel." "Attention Zarkak's fleet," she broadcast. "The second data package contains everything we learned about your systems during this encounter. Consider this a free lesson in human military doctrine. We find that the best way to prevent future conflicts is to ensure potential adversaries understand exactly what they'd be facing." In the analysis center of the Zarkak's flagship, Keltax was poring over the human tactical data. "They're right about everything," she breathed. "Our shield configurations, our formation weaknesses, our over-reliance on standardized responses. They saw it all. And these suggested improvements, they're brilliant." High Marshal Ixal found himself in an unprecedented situation. The humans hadn't just defeated them, they were teaching them. His scales shifted through various colors as he processed this radical departure from standard military protocol. "Captain Miller," he finally responded, his voice carrying genuine respect. "The Zarkak's Confederation acknowledges your tactical superiority in this encounter. Your offer of tactical analysis is unexpected." "Not unexpected, High Marshal," Miller corrected gently. "Just human. We learned long ago that the strongest alliances are built on mutual respect and understanding. You now understand our capabilities. The question is, what will you do with that knowledge?" The answer came 3 weeks later, when the first Zarkak's diplomatic fleet arrived at Earth. Their ships, initially a source of amusement for human observers, were different this time. The crystalline hulls now bore reinforced sections, and their weapon systems showed signs of recent modification. Captain Miller stood in United Earth Naval Command, watching the diplomatic broadcasts. The Zarkak's High Command had done exactly what humanity hoped they would. They'd learned, adapted, and come back stronger. Not as enemies, but as potential allies eager to learn more about humanity's approach to warfare and ship design. "Quite a change from our first meeting," Rodriguez commented, standing beside her in his dress uniform. Miller nodded, watching as Zarkak's diplomats discussed joint military exercises with Earth's Admiralty. They needed to understand that true strength isn't about being unbeatable. It's about how you handle being beaten. In the years that followed, the Thunderchild incident became required study at both human and Zarkak's military academies. The crystalline ships of the Confederation began incorporating human design principles, while Earth's engineers found elegant applications for Zarkak's quantum technology. But perhaps more importantly, the galaxy learned a crucial lesson. Humanity's greatest strength wasn't their technology or their tactics. It was their fundamental understanding that perfection was impossible, but improvement was endless. And sometimes, the best way to win wasn't to destroy your enemy, but to turn them into your student.